Hello, Dylan, and welcome to our podcast. Was my pleasure to watch your documentary.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy you enjoyed my documentary.
Mm.
You took some information from it. I put a lot of effort into it, so finding out that one or two people watched it is fantastic.
Yeah, I found it very surprising that you're very young. Yeah, you're 20 with something years old and
24.
24. Yeah, it's very young. And Dylan, tell us what drove you into that position. Like you spent your best years of your life somewhere abroad in Ukraine, reviewing the war unfolding, and you're risking your personal life. Judging on this video, like it was really risky sometimes. Then you spend the time with our guys, drone operators. Yeah, there was the fixer, but still, it was like very dangerous for you to be there. So tell us what motivated you for that sort of the activity.
Well, first, I'm hoping to peak in my early 30s. So, I'm scheduling that for a little later. I don't know if it's going to be the best time of my life. But as for what motivated me, I came back over here one, two, three, four or five times now. I've been to Ukraine. I've been embedding in the country since April of 2022. And when I came here at first, I was supposed to be here for like 1 to 2 weeks. But all the time that I spent here reaffirmed the fact that I should be here filming and I should be here documenting. Because I remember when, before the war started, it was, this is not going to happen. It's not in Russia's interest. It doesn't make any sense. It could just be training operations. And a lot of people predicted that it wasn't really going to happen and even laughed in the face of the idea, took it non-seriously. And so the fact that it happened and so many people took it non-seriously, it'd be one thing for somebody to say, I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's unlikely. But some people legitimately took it as oh, it's scary, but it's all diplomacy. This is just jostling. It's not a real threat. And the fact that there was that much of a disconnect with not only a large percentage of the uninformed public, but also, a section of the intelligentsia, that was a problem. And then it wasn't just, okay, well, they got that wrong. It was also, well, now that it's happened, obviously this is going to be over in about a month. And now we're dragging on 4 years now. And we're looking to go into the fifth year, going on the fifth year of the full scale invasion, which is, of course, on top of a decade of violence preceding that. So, those two gigantic errors in judgment seem to show that there was a section of those in academia, those in, I would say, commentary culture, those doing the, either the podcast or the university speaking circuit when talking about the war, that they had gotten something wrong. And maybe I thought if I come to this country, I'll be able to get a better idea of what's happening. Maybe I thought that I could produce one documentary and I know I care about it. So maybe if I produce one or two interviews, like I feel like I did something because right now, you feel kind of powerless seeing all these people suffering and you want to contribute in some way or do something that is useful in some manner. But I also just think that I was I was always a fan of history growing up. I was always a fan of listening to these old interviews with World War II soldiers. My family, we had engineers in the Second World War. We had a lot of family members who participated in America's historical wars. And going back and reading the historical letters from the Civil War, going back and listening to interviews, I find this stuff fascinating. And you can learn a lot about the times through that. But what I find extremely frustrating is that when you go back and you read these letters and you go back and you listen to these interviews, sometimes it's done like 30 years after the fact. They're saying we ran over to this bush and and there was like a bombardment. It was like, okay, how long was the bombardment? Was it a very long bombardment? Was it a short bombardment? And then a bunch of guys died. What were their names? How did they die? Did they have the right equipment? And there's a bunch of information that can be lost when you're going back and watching these documentaries. And sometimes you'll even see errors in what actually happened and what we know is historical record and the judgment of these people, not because they're lying, but just because so much time has passed. And so as I continued to document stuff that was happening on the ground, I got more in love with the country. I got in love with documenting history and really the philosophy that history, the first draft of history is journalism, and you want to have a really good first draft, or you're not going to have a really good understanding of what happened. and making sure that we document these experiences from the eyes of the people who experience them as they happened. And that means going to the places where these things are happening. You can't sit in Kiev, you can't sit in Lviv, you can't sit in Berlin or Washington, D.C. You have to go to the Donetsk region, you have to go to Arihiv, you have to go to where these people are experiencing the war firsthand, talk to those people, see what they're feeling as they're feeling it, because that thing, even stuff like that, emotions can change with time. And so I want to document as much of it as possible. And that's my motivation for being here.
Thank you for this response, Dylan. And just to clarify, you're not working for the big media corporation, you're independent journalist, right?
No, I haven't ever worked for any big media corporation. Anything
Okay.
with three letters scares me.
I see, I see. Yeah, I think like after all, it's gonna be the downfall, or it is a downfall of the legacy media. You see, people usually trust the guys who are out there on the front lines and telling the stuff as what is happening really. And your story, yeah, it's a very fresh, by the way, this video that you released about Pokrovsk. It gives us the perspective, and this documentary gives us what was 1 year ago, what is happening right now. And watching your video, it was quite opening that so many drones actually fail. I didn't know actually before your documentary. Like I spoke with, I have my mates in Ukrainian army and we speak with them, but never we discussed this story with how many Ukrainian drones or Russian drones in this case also fail because of the anti-drone warfare, because of the flaws in construction, because of basically human factor. Yeah, you're not a robot, you cannot target focus some tank or some Russian soldier and just hit imminently. There are always the factors. Yeah, it was quite open, but still, you say it in your documentary that even if 1 in 5 drones gets the target, it's still a lot. Yeah, if you compare to.
I mean,
the
when you think about how many shells have to be fired to
hmm
end a soldier's life, it's actually quite substantial. How many rounds of ammunition? It's not just, oh, for every one bullet or every three bullets. It's clips, like clip after clip after clip, magazine after magazine. I'm saying clips as if we're still back in World War II, but magazine after magazine. Um, so if you're gonna go out there and throw these drones at the enemy, you're gonna expect to lose the vast majority of those drones. And so really what we're talking about is a war where if 25% of your drones are hitting the target, that's a fantastic ratio. It doesn't sound fantastic that 3 out of 4 drones are failing, but the majority of the time I'm with these teams, these drones are either getting jammed, they're either getting shot down, they're getting caught in tree lines because these Russians or these Ukrainians, if you're on the other side, are dug in deep in tree lines with a ton of branches. And as your drone's trying to come in, you can be a fantastic pilot, but your propellers get caught up in the branches. And that's just type of stuff happens, especially when you're in high pressure situations. When you're feeling like your trench rumble, when you're getting orders that you need to hit this right here and this right there, and there's a big assault and there's all these vehicles coming in, you need to
hmm
go, 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 and you're throwing out. I mean, sometimes I'd be with teams and they throw out 3 or 4 a day, depending on what axis of the front you're on. Other times when I'm on the Pokrovsk axis or I'm on the Konstantinivka axis, which is where I'm filming mostly now. Right now, I'm filming a documentary about Konstantinivka, just
hmm
published a documentary about Pokrovsk. Um, I can see like 20, 25, 30 drones in like a very short time period go out of the trench if the team is being effective. That was my experience with Lubert on the Konstantinivka axis, and that was my experience in Pokrovsk with the 59th. I mean, well, not the 59th, the 68th. I also filmed with the 59th in
hmm
Pokrovsk. It was over a year, so we filmed with a lot of different teams. But a lot of drones get thrown out in that time period, and in that hustle and bustle, you're going to lose some just due to the high pressure situation of the combat, and also just basic errors. The one part of the documentary that I like that I caught is when they bring the drone to the top, you can hear the shells hitting into the city, and then it's just like, oh, the video feed's not working. Did you fiddle with the thing? Yeah, of course I fiddled with the thing.
hmm
Well, what about the doohickey? Well, of course I did the doohickey. And they're just sitting there trying to figure out how to get it to work. And that's frustrating because it could be, oh, you've messed something up. Or it could be, no, you got sent a dead wire and you did everything correctly, but the wire is just not good. And it's just like, so you have to go back down and remanufacture it. And those type of situations happen quite frequently out there. And having
Mm-hmm.
to keep your head clear to work with these explosive materials, which could set your trench ablaze, the amount of plastic explosives that they have to operate with, the amount of flammable material they have to operate with. It's extremely difficult work, but it's been very rewarding for the Ukrainian defenders when it comes to the amount of casualties they're able to wreak on advancing Russians, considering the manpower shortage.
Yeah, just right now, then we are recording this video. We got breaking news about one more Russian breakthrough attempt that happened in the southern part of Ukraine. No, not the southern, in Pokrovsk direction. Today, near Mirnograd, Russian occupiers tried to break through, assault using heavy armor, but yeah, we have also the video confirmation that it failed because of the Ukrainian drones. Well, actually, the kill zone creation, I understand that it's not possible alongside the front lines, but there are some specific spots where Ukraine was successful, and Russia also, yeah, they also used their drones. I think that this landing operation with the UH-60, I think it went, from what I saw, went under the Russian drone strikes, unfortunately. So there are some losses. And you started your video also from, not from the Pokrovsk, but from the village roughly 15 kilometers away. Yeah, I don't remember the name. And throughout the year,
Palasinivka.
yeah, I'm listening. And Russians, after all, you finish your video, then Russians were at the outskirts of Pokrovsk. Mm, so they still advance, yeah, and they take the ground. Can we say that Russian army is winning in this war, judging on like they after all gained the territories, and despite all of those drones, like they still with those mid waves, but still they gained the ground, yeah. So at some point, so what do you think about this?
Well, it depends because one can, and I understand I filmed this documentary over a year, and when you jump 3 or 4 months, it's quite a significant jump forward. But in the film, we're talking to a team outside of Sildove right after it fell, an artillery team
Mm-hmm,
attached to the 68th, as they're operating under FPVs that are monitoring the area, that are stalking the area, and they've got to fire their artillery gun in between the FPVs stalking their position. Very difficult work as they're trying to stem the tide. And that was in December of last year. So that was, right going into the winter. That was last winter. And they
mm-hmm,
were saying, oh, the Russians are trying to take Pokrovsk by Christmas.
mm-hmm,
And that was in 2024. Now we're going into, Christmas time and winter time, Thanksgiving for the Yankees out there. Um, in 2025, it's been a year. And so, if the Russian goals, as they were espousing back then, were true, that they wanted to break through into Pokrovsk last year, and it's been a year since then they've had victories in the sense that they've moved forward. But the amount of casualties that they've taken to move forward, the amount of time that they've taken to move forward, and whether or not these goals that they are achieving are buttressing their further efforts for their bigger objectives. For example, Pokrovsk originally, and you hear this in the documentary when we're traveling with this artillery team, very
mm-hmm.
chatty artillery team, which I appreciate as a journalist, very chatty soldiers. And they were talking about how, why haven't we blown up the railway yet? Why haven't we blown up the railway? Because this is a logistical hub. And if they're going to take Pokrovsk, we need to make sure that they don't have it ready as a logistical hub. Well, since then, obviously, the railways there have been not only blown
Mm-hmm.
up, they've been smashed to smithereens. The roads have been smashed to smithereens. Basically, everything in Pokrovsk has been smashed to smithereens. And I remember, and it's really tragic, just watching each time as I come back, more and more of the city is destroyed, less of the faces we recognize from before. But it also means that its ability to be used as a logistical hub and a node for Russian offensives has greatly diminished, and now it's mostly going to be used as an urban center by which they can further launch operations. A speed bump to overcome, less a logistical node for the Russian war machine. And so I think that, yeah, they have achieved the victory of taking Pokrovsk, but now what that amounts to is they can show it on TV, and they've taken more territory uh, so they can focus on northern Donetsk. They can focus on Kramatorsk. They can focus on Slovyansk. They can focus on all these other locations, Liman and such. And that is the fight ahead. And that's why we end the documentary talking about that fight ahead.
I understand, Dylan. My fear, like, about the situation on the front lines, like, I watch some of the, I'm pro-Ukrainian YouTuber myself, and I watch some pro-Ukrainian YouTubers as well. They all say the same narratives, that, for example, Russia is grinding, yeah, they're slowly advancing, and the territory of Ukraine is very big. So for Russia, it will take like even centuries or decades yet to occupy the entire Ukraine, and it is not important. But what worries me that there is the defense line, and from Konstantinivka to Slavyansk, that's basically the defense line, those big urban territories. So I fear that if Russia, for example, occupies all of that, or they break through from Pokrovsk to Dobropilya, bypassing the main defense line of Ukraine, that could create, the open field military potential for Russia to advance faster towards, I know, Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, Pavlograd, maybe also circumnavigating to Kharkiv. So there could be multiple of the opportunities. There are not many like big settlements which could be used as defense points. So that's my personal fear. Do you think that it could happen like that? Because now they scroll, and in the future they can break through and advance as it was in 2022, for example.
This risk always exists to some extent.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there's never it'd be one thing to say, well, if we've gotten to this amount of soldiers, then this threat is not there. But a lot of these breakthroughs that happened either on Dobrapila or previous breakthroughs, like what led up to the collapse of Soldove with the flanks collapsing, rotations gone wrong, is that situations can spiral out of control and correlating factors can lead to a breakthrough. It's a lot of times it's not just that, well, the Russians had this perfect game plan. It's that there was a rotation. People did not return to the position in time. There was an hour gap. They took this position. They saw the opportunity. They had their troops gathered in advance. Then they take advantage of the situation. And so I think that there is the risk that the Russians break through the defensive line and that the Ukrainians, unable to deal with the breakthrough, uh, spiral out of control, and therefore they lead to 10, 20, 30-kilometer grabs of territory. But the way that the war has progressed so far is that any time that something like this has occurred, as what happened with Dobrapila, as
Yeah.
what happened with Soldove, is this progresses about 10 or 15 so kilometers maximum. The Russians don't have the manpower actually to plug or fill
Mm.
the hole immediately. And until the Russians have the ability to either A, fill the hole with so much manpower so quickly that the Ukrainians cannot counter it with drone fire, artillery fire, and I'll call them the cleanup crews or the firemen, as they have been lovingly
Yeah.
called, which is the Skval units, or as we're seeing right now outside of Pokrovsk, the special forces who would much rather be doing secretive mining work or stuff like that, but have now been equipped into a fire support role to clean up where the fires are worst. So I think that as as long as they don't have the ability to either flood it with the troops necessary immediately by having those people in place, or have the technological and mechanized advantage, edge, and organized advantage to actually engage in large scale mechanized warfare, as Western theorists have pontificated about endlessly in this war, then the Russians are going to have to grind forward, or they're going to have these breakthroughs, which will be short lived, as has been the experience since the end of 2022 up until this point. That is the likely scenario, but these factors can change. If
Mm.
Vladimir Putin decides, I don't care if the public is apathetic, we're going to go into a full mobilized campaign. Now that could backfire, and it could be the apathetic public says, no, we don't want to do this. Are you crazy? 4 years on, you're saying year 6 or 7 is going to be the year. We're not into it. But it could also be that they shrug their shoulders. Some people dodge the draft. Some people get snatched up, and then they have the manpower to attempt the stuff in the first column, and then Ukraine has to make a lot more difficult decisions. And so that's why when people talk about war or talk about history apathetically, oh, these things will happen because these general big factors. No, the United States getting involved with heavier and heavier sanctions, but also sanctions enforcement, going after the shadow fleet, going after the private companies that are providing Russia with back channels, going after the countries, including allies like Turkey, where there is a lot of sanctions invasion. These things can have a real effect on the war, even if, it doesn't feel like it in the immediate sense.
Yeah, I see, Dylan. The problem that before maybe United States had this influence, to ban absolutely everything, but now those markets worldwide they continue to trade with Russia, and I think that after all, without applying or reinforcing new sanctions on Russia, they will circumnavigate it after all because it's very very addictive. It's like a cartel, then they sell very cheap Russian oil. There is always a demand for that one. Also in Europe, by the way, and this situation is very strange. Then we have also customers for Russian fossil fuels in Europe. By the time they try to support Ukraine, they support Ukraine, but not as much as it needed, and still they cooperate with Russia. And yeah, and by the way, Chinese Prime Minister, this guy 1E, during his meeting with Kaja Kallas, also the foreign minister of European Union, if you may call her like that. So one is say that they will not let Russia lose. It's not the interest of China to let Russia lose. So I think that they will try to support Russia. And I think that Russia, like my vision, that Putin is not going to end it anytime soon. And there is not immediate light at the end of the tunnel, despite those sanctions. Still, Russians, they live now better life than it was for them in 90s and during the Soviet time in 80s. It was a very big deficit. Still, their life is better. So I think Putin knows where he might push that far. He was living in this area of 90s and 80s, so maybe he's still he still thinks that he may even mobilize those Russian men, and Russians won't say anything. Well, we don't know. It's gonna be maybe even Black Swan like Prigozhin. Something may happen. So take saying about this prediction, do you have any about, do you think that the war will continue as it is, or maybe there are some of the changes in the
I'm
cabinet?
I'm I've been a pessimist for a bit on the
Mm,
continuation of the war. I didn't see any action being taken
mm,
by any party involved that would derail us from the current track, which is a long-standing war of attrition where two forces grind upon each other until one starts to break down to a point where they cannot bear it any longer, either due to desertions and they want to avoid some type of mass catastrophe on one side, or economic undermining and they can no longer finance the war. Some very significant strategic loss, say like the Russians crossed the Dnieper River, and then they were making a breakthrough into like locations like Mykolaiv again, or like stuff
mm,
that would make Ukrainian commanders really question if the sovereignty of an existent Ukrainian state could be continued without an immediate deal. Still backed by some amount of Western power, but I don't see, so like the different alterations either on the pro-Ukrainian side or the pro-Russian side that it could go. There was no significant force in that way. And
mm.
all of the negotiating attempts that have been made in a very limp-wristed fashion. This is a very out-of-date term. Pillow-fisted fashion. In a
Yeah,
way
yeah.
that where you go and you engage as if you are scared to punish the person that you wish to discipline. And by what I mean by that is, look, you have to engage with us or else. But if there's no or else on the other side of that, then you can say or else what, and then you can continue to poke and prod and see what we can get away with. And so in this time period where Donald Trump has become president of the United States and there has been all these red lines put down, the only other alternative to Trump is the Europeans. And the Europeans, they brag about we used to import 40% Russian energy. Now it's just 19%. Look at us. We're real champions over here. And so the Russians think, yeah, have a few drones. Have a few
Mm,
drones in Poland. Have a few drones in Romania. Have a flyover near the capital of Estonia. Have a flyover over against a Polish drilling rig because they want to see what they can get away with as long as there is no red line actually crossed. They understand the language of action. They understand the language of, in this case, force. They understand a armored column getting blown up, and that's a failure, and so now they have to withdraw. They understand being unable to economically finance the war. If they don't have the money, they can't buy the ammunition. That's something they understand. They understand a train headed towards a cliff for their
mm,
economy or for their war effort. And so these are the things we have to manifest for them to come to the table. If you wanted to use there's a red line here, we can be aggressive, we can punish the Russians like Trump talked about. But up until a week ago, we had seen zero action on the 24-hour peace deal. We're a few hours behind.
yeah, yeah, I see, Dylan. Yeah, I agree with you on that one. It's I don't see like how it can potentially end in the coming even years. Putin is so, there is always an option for Putin to agree on this deal. Zelensky already agrees because maybe he understands that Ukraine doesn't have enough military power to return back the territories or something. So maybe it's the better variant to freeze and stop on the current front lines and take a breath, prepare defense lines just in case of the second attempt of Putin. And Trump agrees on that. Putin doesn't agree, but he always has this option on the table. So why not to try to break through? Why not to try to waste more resources until, there are some of the potential meetings will start to spread around Russia. So far, they are pretty much okay with their losses, from what I see, and it drives Putin to continue. And then he sees some of the sign. Okay, let's freeze it. Let's freeze it because this option is out there. So yeah, I think because of that also he may try to continue this war in Ukraine.
There's a bunch of factors as to why Putin is deciding to continue the war that led me to really question the viability of a lot of people talking about this war at the start, considering how shallow a lot of these narratives would be, where some of it would
Mm.
be, well, they're invading because of NATO expansion,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
they're invading because Putin's an evil man. And this is just Russian imperialism, or oh, it's just simply it's a lot of these things combined. I think it's
Yeah.
part of it is, of course, that any giant, powerful alliance structure next to you, especially if it has historical tradition of beating you, at least geopolitically, there's going to be some anxiety around that, especially if you're a former KGB operative who's the head of the state.
Hmm.
There's a level of Vladimir Putin wanting to rebuild that Ruski Mir. And I know a lot of people before the war, like John Mearsheimer, like basically
Hmm.
put like very little ilk into this type of ideological distinction. That comes from their realist background. And I always thought realists, pure realists, these types of realists like John Mearsheimer, they very had shallow depth of view. They didn't have aperture in their view. Because
Hmm.
if Vladimir Putin can sink a meeting with Donald Trump by making Reddit tier ramblings about, oh, Yaroslav the Wise's horse took a trollop near Kiev in this year, and put, Donald Trump, he's out of it. He's asleep. He's gone. If that's gonna be what Vladimir Putin does in private and in public on Tucker Carlson's show, that's just him.
Yeah.
And you have to take into evaluation that those essays he was releasing before the war about there can only be a Ukraine that's part of the Ruski Mir or no Ukraine at all is his genuine belief. And so you can talk about all of the alliance structures in the world about, to put all these safety mechanisms in place. If he truly believes that's the only way Russia can function, then that's going to be a motivating factor. And there's also the fact that Putin's an old guy. He's an old fart, he should be playing pickleball, and instead he's invading countries. And because of that, I think that he is in the legacy building phase of his time in office, and he has a bunch of long term objectives that make this period of his rule when he's going towards Robert Mugabe, like sagging in the chair style of leadership. He wants to get done, stuff done sooner rather than later.
Yeah. It's not, I think, applied to Putin, like you mentioned. Yeah. I hope there will be no any special military operation started on the other side of our planet. Yeah, you understand what I mean. There's like the politician, the older class. I think it's very bad that they still stay in power for such extensive period of time. Their vision is so much deprivated, as well as Putin. He's living in his own personal bubble, saying about Pokrovsk, we mentioned, sent those journalists. He really sent the invitations for journalists in attempt to show that the Ukrainian army is encircled there.
The
Try to,
BBC asked me when they asked
uh-huh.
me to talk to me about the documentary, are you gonna go with the Russian army to Pokrovsk? What do you mean am I gonna go to Pokrovsk? No, no, I'm not gonna
So
do
they
that.
took it
There's
seriously. Yeah.
zero trust.
Okay. They took it really seriously, and try. I think he should at first deploy his own propaganda there because I think it's not possible for them to get to Pokrovsk either. Dylan, let's go back to the ground and your video. It is very like I feel like it's the best documentary out there filmed since the start of the war by foreign journalists and published on YouTube. Well, thank you so much for it. It really opens the eyes and for people around the world, especially, the touching story that you filmed inside around the households, the yard, those graves and how people, I heard those stories from personally from the people I know in Mariupol, but in your video, it's the first time I saw like those graves in a yard. It's really like surreal, and people still live there in this bombardment area, and they still like they don't want to evacuate in some of the cases. Do you understand this? Like they don't have where to go, or why
These
they?
they stay for first off, thank you for the kind
Mm,
words about my documentary. I do appreciate it. Very high praise. It means a lot. Um, it's there's a variety of reasons why these people stay. There's a certain collection of people who believe that they if they leave, they're not going to be able to support themselves. That they
mm,
live off of $150 a month pension. And in Kiev, it costs $250 a month for an apartment. And then you got all this for food and you got all this for this and that. And you've never lived, what, 50 kilometers outside of your village. And now you're expected to go all the way to this major metropolitan area with 3.5 million people. It's just not realistic for you in your mind. That's their perspective. And if they've
mm.
got nobody else to support them, no other family to support them, then who's going to back them up there? The government, which is struggling
Yeah.
to finance itself, the government, which is struggling to finance the war effort, let alone all the humanitarian efforts behind it, and now with the U.S. aid cuts, it's the efforts have become more difficult. Then there's also the problem with even if they have family, they don't want to be a burden to their family. And this is a popular conception that you hear from some people that they don't want to
Mm,
be a burden upon their family, even though it's often their families who are asking the evacuation teams to come get them in the first place. And this leads to another big category of people, and I could just call them the stubborn. There are just some people, this is my house. I own it. I bought it. I worked for it. Get the oligarchs to come buy it from me. Then I'll leave, or I've lived here my whole life and I'm not going to not live here. I've stayed here during 2015 and 2016, and now you think you're going to get me out of here now? No, I'm not going to leave. My kid's buried there. My father's buried there. I'm staying here forever.
yes.
And what can you say to that? Then there's people who are the perpetually intoxicated, and so they're living the same way now that they were living before the war, to be completely honest. Then there's the people who are draft dodging. There are young men,
Hmm, hmm.
and now tell me if this logic makes sense to you, because for some people it makes sense, for some people it doesn't make sense. They don't want to join the Ukrainian armed forces because of the popular conception of what infantry service is like. And so they don't want to join the Ukrainian armed forces. And so they stay hidden in their village houses with their families underground for basically the last 3 to 4 years now, or whenever they heard that it was their time to go serve. But as the Russian army has gotten closer and closer, now the war's around them. Their houses get shelled, their drones fly around, constant danger around every corner, but they continue to stay in these village houses because they don't want to get drafted. And they do believe genuinely believe that if they were to leave, they'd immediately get picked up at the first evacuation point and sent into the Ukrainian armed forces. I've never seen that, but that
Mm,
fear is still there. And so there are people, young men, that's what most of the young men on the who are living in these frontline towns, that's just the truth of the matter. That's what they're doing and dealing with. Lastly, of course, there's a population of people who believe if the Russians take over, the violence will stop. Um, I That's their conception.
I see, Dylan. Yeah, you know, there also were some pro-Russian people or are pro-Russian people, even in occupied Mariupol. I know it from my friend who stayed there for all of the like for many many days of Mariupol shelling. He's the captain on a vessel. Also has a volunteer fund. He later on founded in Odessa. Now he left Ukraine. He is a vessel captain after all. So he told me that they were hiding in the basements. There were some of those grandmas. They were telling, "Oh, don't worry, Russians will come and everything will stop. They will save us." And he's like, and it was not the only case. There were multiple of those cases, he said. And definitely there are some of the, you know, those brainwashed people in who used to live in those regions. I'm from Crimea myself. I know what I'm speaking about though. So there, you know, this Russian ideology or pro-Russian stuff was put there for ages. And yeah, I understand that some part of the percentage of the people they were even pro-Russian, even in that case. Maybe because they were watching Russian TV, you know, they were part of this Russian culture, associated themselves with that more than with Ukraine. That's why they believed into what Russians were saying, even under shells, which is very strange as for me. Have you
Yeah,
encountered?
there's an allure to the Russian cultural Ruski Mir, to this idea of
Mm,
being part of this grander project, much bigger than oneself, attached to so much art and music, popular literature
mm-hmm.
that's known around the world. You go to a different country, and for a lot of people's history, as Ukrainians, it was you go to another country in the 90s, you tell people you're Ukrainian, I have no clue what that is. You tell
Yeah,
people
yeah,
you're
it's
Russian, of
like
course they know what
yeah,
that is.
yeah.
And so there was this allure because of that, also due to like history of families getting intermarried and populations that were brought in, stuff that people get accustomed to after military service, there being, for example, a large military population in Crimea, that led to a lot of people who had a romanticized view of the Russians and the Russian relationship with the Ukrainian nation. But as Ukraine has developed more as a civil society, and they've been able to have conversations that are not allowed in Russia. For example, in Russia, they opened up the archives, then Putin came to power, then they closed them. The
Yeah,
archives are no
yeah,
longer open. In Ukraine, there is active debates about not only their relationship with the Russian language, their relationship with the history of Russian imperialism, but also their relationship with their neighbors in Poland and certain historical
mm-hmm,
tragedies,
mm-hmm.
ongoing historical conversations, and open diplomacy that's ongoing right now between the Polish and Ukrainian governments. In Russia, those conversations are shut down on their face. In Russia, we actually see a retraction in many of these areas as Stalin statues are being reintroduced, and a lot of this old repressive tactics are being idealized. And I think a lot of that, for people who want an idea of Ukrainian civil society, that pushed them away from the Ruski Mir of this romanticized view. But for the people who these types of things do not matter in their day-to-day life, especially if you're out in the village and you're not really interacting with a lot of
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
the day-to-day civil society, your perfect society is being separated from all that. Being able to mind your own business, it might not matter as much, and a lot of the information of what's going on might not get to you. And it was the language you always were speaking. It's the people you always knew, and so why should anything change?
I see. I see, Dylan. And we touched the topic of the some demotivation of the young Ukrainian men. Do you feel that there are not many, like people tired of this war? They're exhausted for 4 years, and really, Ukrainian men, yeah, let's be honest, many of them they're hiding and not willing to join. Do you feel like there could be some of them breakthrough in this mentality that maybe it can harm Ukrainian army itself or Ukrainian society, like this constant war and people, they, I mean, volunteers, they're not joining Ukrainian army that much as in 2022, and basically judging on what is happening, like with the Ukrainian mobilization policy and so on, and whom they mobilize forcefully, they fight, or like, let's speak about this, some sort of the factor, like it because it's important also.
So this is not featured in the documentary,
Mm-hmm.
but I recently had an interview with some men in the 100th Infantry. They're
Mm-hmm.
fighting around Konstantinivka, so they're fighting on that axis. I've been spending a lot of time on that axis
Mm-hmm.
recently because I think that's going to be it's already a major hotspot, but I think it's
Yeah.
going to definitely be one that a lot of people are going to be paying attention to soon, and it deserves that attention. Um, he tells me that 8 out of 10 of the men that they're taking now are conscripts. So
Mm-hmm.
these are people who were mobilized, whether they were mobilized off the street, whether they came to the office after being called up, who knows,
Mm-hmm.
but they were mobilized. And that generally the morale of the new boys coming in is low, that most of them don't want to be there. But people get around it or like deal with that in different ways. Some people it's just they kind of feel tragic,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of fall into a depression. Other people, they just kind of put, I'm a man. I'm going to put my nose to the grindstone. I'm going to deal with it. I
Mm-hmm.
got called up. It's the short end of the stick, but sometimes that happens. That's life. For other people, sometimes they just grow distant with their surroundings. Others, they adapt quite well and they actually find a level of camaraderie and they find actually their place in the unit. But that's going to depend on where you are. And that's why a lot of people talk about, like, I better go and volunteer. I don't want to get conscripted because if I
Mm-hmm.
volunteer, then at least I can choose where I go. So
Yeah,
some
yeah,
of
yeah,
my buddies
yeah,
I know who
that's the
got
good thing.
problems with documents, they have this internal dilemma all the time. Do I go and volunteer or do I just wait for them to pick me up? And then I'm not going to have a choice about where I go. Or I'm going to have a lot reduced choice. Not necessarily no choice, but a lot of reduced choice. And so I would say the morale is worse, and the possibility of desertion, I would say, is probably worse at this point than it was at earlier periods of the war. And when I was talking to him, he was very frank with me that there are more cases of desertion
Yeah,
now. And when I say, but let me be very specific, I mean abandoning one's position. I do not mean running into Russian lines, like let me join the Russian army. I
yeah, yeah,
mean
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm going home. That's what I mean. And there's been more and more prosecutions of this. This isn't just like talk. You can see in the legal system, they're processing more and more of these cases. And the Ukrainians have actually adapted to this, making it so that actually, if you abandon your position once, you can come back. Don't worry about it. We'll have like a sit down talk with you and we'll figure something out. This is in order to get people who fled abroad and people who fled internally because, there's an obvious manpower problem. So morale is at a bad spot, but I don't think it's particularly collapsing, that there's large scale collapse and abandonment of the front line. I don't think it's significantly worse than what it was 6 months ago. I just think that it hasn't been in a particularly fantastic place for a while because people know that this war has to drag on, and there isn't a 100% concrete plan for how every shell is going to get to Ukraine and exactly what the future is for support for Ukraine, as America is still a giant question mark, and we have no reason to believe that question marks can be answered in the immediate future.
Yeah, yeah. The point of my question was that recently the statistics was released about CZC, so basically it's abandoning position. It's not desertion. It's not surrendering to Russian army whatsoever. Yeah, as you said, people just leaving, and the numbers are just huge. So each month, more than 10,000 people, well, at least criminal cases are open for 10,000 people or more each month, and altogether it's more than 200,000 soldiers who left the position. But in many of the cases, it's not because they're afraid to fight or something. Well, there are the cases, of course, that they're afraid to fight. They just leave. They're mobilized by TCK on the streets, and the only option for them to leave is from the army regiment. But also there are some of the, incompetent commanders. Like recently I did the video about this TikToker on the South Front. I forgot his name, but he posted some of the military maps on his TikTok channel. And this is crazy. Like there are some of those. And it's like the variant to change your military branch, to change your brigade or I don't know, your structure. Yeah, you go to SZC, leave your position, and you have one time you can do it. Later on, you can join like some other place, yeah, with more or less competent commander. Because yeah, after all, command in the Ukrainian army it's not perfect, especially judging on like recent cases with the strike of 35th Marine Brigade in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast that happened just because they were lined up for some sort of award ceremony, and once again the same story happens as in Chernigiv Oblast with this. So sometimes I'm in shock.
They gotta just
Yeah,
decide to Nova post all the awards.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, you
yeah,
don't
yeah,
need
yeah,
pictures of it.
yeah.
Just Nova post everybody the awards because these awards ceremonies shouldn't be shooting galleries, and that's what they're becoming. Actually, like there's
Yeah,
been
yeah,
so many of these deadly instances where it's just people. Not sometimes it's not even medals. Sometimes it's like paper placards.
yeah, yeah. Подяка, like the paper. It's like yeah, it's reward. It's crazy. Like, so I understand what you are talking about. Yeah. So you think that it's not like imminent threat right now for Ukrainian army? This some sort of the
I don't think
demotivation.
it's an imminent threat, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a grinding threat. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
problem is that if this is a war of attrition and that's a grinding threat, then that's something over the long run which can have a real effect for a country with a manpower crisis. And so the reputation that the Ukrainian armed forces have because of their command, because
Mm-hmm.
of problems with supply that Ukraine's allies and its domestic industry will have to address, and the need for new technologies to counter Russian weapon systems. For example, making sure that drone nets are placed well in advance of your lines to the front.
Mm-hmm.
If they see you making an effort to protect their lives and they see themselves getting in vehicles that are not essentially just tin cans on the road that'll get torn in half by one ball bearing, then I think that more people will be willing to defend their lives and defend their country, defend their families' lives because they have something to preserve. But if they're just in their mind throwing themselves into the meat grinder, then what's the point? Especially if they can wait until if they ever wanted to serve until possibly it got better, or if it didn't, then maybe the army didn't deserve its service. And there are people who think like that. Like, is this a government that is worthy of my service? You might have a nation that's worthy of your service, but it's not like Taras Shevchenko rises from the heavens and he's just like, I will command you in the battle. You have government officials, bureaucrats,
Mm-hmm.
officers. These are the people who lead you in the battle. And Ukraine deserves officers in a command that are worthy to serve it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The problem I think is with this old Soviet school, Ukraine is like this, still like the Soviet heritage, and the small Soviet army cannot win against the big Soviet army. Our like that Russian commanders, I think they're more incompetent than Ukrainian ones. In Pokrov's direction, you probably also follow the news how they try to advance to Shakhova, to Vladimirivka, I think the village. They burned like 70 with something vehicles for the last months. It's crazy, like, and there was one attack to destroy the bridge. Like, and I saw the video how Russian motorcyclists they drove, to the edge of this bridge. Like, what the bridge has gone well before, and the Russian command really sent them to this like close connection, and immediately they were attacked by Ukrainian drones. Like what? Like I cannot imagine it in Ukrainian army. It could be a scandal if those videos are shared in internet with Ukrainian soldiers doing this stuff. But for Russia, everything is okay. They live in this autocracy. For Russians, everything is okay. Those losses, and wow, how is it happen? So we are very lucky actually with the Russian command, which I think is even more incompetent than sometimes Ukrainian command with those awards happening under strikes of Iskander. Yeah, it's interesting.
There's been a lot of mechanized assaults stopped by mud puddles and
Hmm.
small, just like small, not even like rivers. You'd call them creeks. I think would be a better description of them. And so, I mean, that's still happening right now during these assaults, during this effort to put as much pressure as possible,
Hmm.
because reports indicate that Vladimir Putin wants Pokrovsk captured by the middle of this month,
Hmm.
mid-November. So I think that there is a certain amount of pressure for the military command to achieve this goal. And I mean, maybe they could achieve the goal like 30 days from now, but they want to apply as much pressure as possible to stop as many Ukrainians from getting out from Pokrovsk, but also
Hmm.
meeting this stated deadline.
I see. I see, Dylan. I really like your perspective. I watched your video about like sometimes you speak about Ukrainian politics, and of course you understand like what is happening on the ground. And I really like your honest opinion on the situation. And of course, more this attitude of Ukrainian soldiers because you're out there deployed on the ground. So yeah, thank you so much for it. And you saw this war evolving for already many years, and um, you saw how the drone technologies evolve. Do you think that there could be some sort of the Waffe, some sort of the weapon that can change the situation on the front lines? Like Russians use lots of the gliding aviation bombs, powerful ones. They're not so precise as American or French made, but still they're very, very devastative. Maybe some now they put jet engines on those, increasing the range up to 200 kilometers. Ukraine also tries to develop its own drones, Flamingo missiles, Neptune. Do you think that there could be some sort of the weapon that could change something? This war of attrition, this standstill confrontation, or
I think that there's multiple weapon systems that could really shift the war. It's a question of quantity. For example, there are Shaheds, these drones that sound like a lawnmower flying over your apartment. Not a
Mhm,
fantastic sound. A lot of them run out of fuel, ram into civilian homes, very devastating. But a lot of these can be shut down by guns that were made in the interwar period. I've seen them
mhm,
shot down by Maxim machine guns. I've seen them shot down by guns made in 1928. So the now obviously you can do a lot better with a Browning. You can do a lot better with a bigger munition, but because of the speed of these drones and how close to the ground they have to fly, there's a
mhm,
weakness to them. If the Russians were able to get in high quantity the jet engines to throw these at much faster speeds, which they have done in smaller amounts, mixed in with these drone attacks, and that could be potentially devastating for Ukrainian industry, as a lot of these drones will no longer be able to be intercepted by these teams. And these teams that have been trained on these systems for
mhm,
years now will have to be retrained on new systems or given new priorities. And so that's something that could be potentially devastating if Russia can get the jet parts for their aerospace industry or get the necessary components which require foreign input, which sanctions has an impact on. There's also, of course, the fact that Ukraine has produced more drones this year than in any other year of the war combined, even if you were to cut the publicly stated numbers given by the government in half. I mean, the amount of drones that they're producing in a long range capacity in this year is incomparable to every other year of the war. And so when I talk to people about they're really devastating the oil refineries, people say, "Oh, I heard something about this in like 2022 or 2023. I heard about a drone hitting this or that." One drone on one not even refinery like internal vulnerable components. We're talking about taking out like one big barrel of fuel. That's not doing anything. But when you're getting these drones in more quantity and you're getting these drones more accurate to actually target the most vulnerable components of these refineries that you have to import foreign parts for that you don't have. And if you do get them, they're going to be tremendously expensive. And then 2 weeks later, after you've spent these giant costs, it just all happens again with another $10,000 drone. Terrible time for the Russian economy. So the quantity and quality of the accuracy are two big components that have changed when it comes to the Ukrainian drone campaign. Then, of course, if the Ukrainians really can get these, I mean, they talk about the flamingo, but it can be the flamingo, it can be the toucan, it can be the penguin. I do not care. If
mhm,
they get a long range missile, which can take a much heavier payload to punch into the targets that are at that are at air bases and otherwise, that are going to be harder to intercept, and most importantly, carry a payload that can destroy much more, meaning, the sheltered components at an airbase that has barriers that a drone and its much smaller warhead can just, it just cannot deal with. Even with all these component changes to Ukrainian drone program, the warheads have not gotten that bigger. They've gotten slightly bigger, but they're largely the same size. And so that is something that could really change up the war for the Ukrainians. But that's again a question of quantity. How much is going to be invested in the Ukrainian missile program? So there's a bunch of areas where you can put huge pressure on the war for pressure points on the war of attrition, but this all requires large scale investment. And right now, the Russians have a problem with sanctions and the fact that their economy could like slip into recession. And, the war economy is really the only area where the economy is expanding. And the Ukrainians need more components, need more foreign investment. And they've taken basically as much debt as many debtors or, those who back them are willing to give them.
Yeah, I see, Dylan. Yeah. Well, interesting. About the participants of your movie, do you still maintain connection with them? Do you know about their destiny? Are they still serving in Ukrainian army? You know something about them?
Yeah, every few weeks to every few months, depending on the soldiers, we try to touch in with either we touch in with the press officers or the soldiers
Mm.
directly. So the press officers will give us a general idea of what's happened, and sometimes I remember once we got heard that this one guy's no longer serving, that he actually stayed with his family in Spain and decided I think I'm done with this after being
Okay,
given new orders. While other dudes are continuing to fight, continuing to
mm.
hold back the Russian army. All my dudes with the 68th that I filmed with all the drone teams, as far as I know, they're all okay. Actually,
Mm.
the from the first day, from the first FPV drone mission, 2 weeks after we filmed with them, that position got hit. But everybody got out okay.
I see, Dylan. And what is your take on what are your next plans like personally in your maybe journalism or life? Are you going to return back to USA or are you going to stay in Ukraine filming more documentaries as you do right now in Konstantinivka? Do you really like feel your dedication to this process? Because yeah, after all, like I personally worry about you, my subscribers as well, because it's actually a risky job, being I cannot imagine being deployed to the front lines themselves if it is that risky being in a drone team, which is further away from the actual fighting front lines, but still Russians, they may launch some of the caps, gliding bombs, or their own drones, and they specifically hunt those drone teams. So, like I worry about you. That's why I ask you, what are your next plans, just in general? Maybe you cannot disclose some of the information, but like tell us your plans, what to expect.
Well, I've been working on a lot of big projects for a while that I want to publish. Of course, I'm still filming my documentary on the Battle for Konstantinivka. I've been filming for over 2 years, a documentary on
No.
drones, filming with every type of drone team that is currently in service in the country, every from a recon to fixed wing to FPV to night bomber to just everything, the ground drone, sea drone to some extent. Just everything we can physically get with, and I do want to publish that. I have a short piece on body recovery I want to publish. I got a piece from Odessa I want to publish, and I got a piece on the Dnipro border with more vol units, command units, trying to hold back the stem of the Russian advance that I want to publish. So I've got a lot of footage, like terabytes of footage that I still have to publish, but I want to keep on filming. I want to keep on
Mm.
filming in the Donetsk region because the struggle over there is still going on, and some of the most important battles are likely to come. And I think that one-third of all of the fighting, all of the offensives are happening on this very short area between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka. One-third to maybe like at this point, like two-fifths of all offensive actions are happening right there. And so if you're a journalist and you want to cover the war, you got to go to the war to cover the war. I don't know why you're even in the country otherwise. I mean, I can understand you're trying to like, blog in Kiev or blog in Lviv. That's like fantastic. That's good for getting information out there. But if your job is to document the war, which is specifically different than just going and talking about the war or just taking information and passing it to the Western audience. But if your job is to document the war, you got to be what the war is. So I'm going to be in the country for a little bit longer before going home for the holidays. And then after I rest home for the holidays, I'll plan to be right back in the country, getting back to it. I spend 6 months to 8 months a year in Ukraine now, and I don't plan to change until the guns stop firing because, it's too important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dylan, for your documentation of what is happening. It's really important, actually, for people worldwide to see the situation on the ground. And luckily, we have guys like you. And thank you for everything you do for Ukraine and for free world. Thank you, Dylan. And
I
guys,
want to,
yeah,
I do want to
uh,
thank everybody for paying attention to the war, following the war. It's, the full-scale invasion has been going on for almost 4 years. And at this point, the majority of people have checked out, have tuned out. And for the people that are still like paying attention, still following it day by day, I know the Ukrainians appreciate it. And I know that the boys on the front appreciate those who keep them in their thoughts, that continue to monitor what's going on and haven't forgotten about them. I know they appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, guys. And the link for Dylan's fantastic documentary you may find just in the video description below. It is, for me, it's at first it was strange that it got like 30 with something thousand views for one day. Like, guys, it is worth every second to watch that movie. It's 1 hour 49 minutes as far as I remember, something like that. But it's worth every
And
freaking
we cut it
second.
down, by the way. It was
Oh, I
longer
see.
actually originally. We actually cut some.
Oh, it is fantastic, guys. You have to watch it and please spread it, share it, because this piece of art should be all around the internet. Like, because the speakers, like I am like, I'm in a comfortable chair studio speaking about the war in Ukraine. I know nothing actually what is happening on the ground compared to journalists, independent journalists like Dylan deployed, and they deserve way, way more views than me or any other pro-Ukrainian YouTuber out there in some other country. So please give it a share, give it a like, and subscribe for Dylan's channel. It's everything is in the video description below. Thank you, Dylan, for participating today's interview podcast on the channel. And yeah, thanks again for your great job you do for Ukraine.
I had a great time. Thank you for having me on, and keep up the good work, keeping everybody informed about what's going on over here.
Ciao.